everyone, and welcome to this week's Insight. I'm thrilled again to have a fabulous guest with us today, and we are talking to the CEO of Graze and mother of James, a Reach child. It's great to see you, Joanna Allen. Welcome, and thank you very much indeed for joining us.
It's a pleasure.
I'd like to start off by talking about James, because obviously, like every Reach child, you went through that emotional roller coaster when you first found out that James was going to be different. Tell us a little bit about that and what happened and what you went through that will remind so many people watching this of their first experience.
Absolutely. So I can remember it vividly. My husband and I had gone in for our 20-week scan, and the radiographer who was in with us had mentioned when we went in for the scan that she had a sore throat. And so James is our second child, so we felt like we were used to the process, and we were delighted to be seeing all of these amazing images of our new baby boy, and thought nothing, frankly, of the fact that she was very quiet as we went through it, just really delighted that we were getting to see so much. And I remember her leaving the room and saying, she wanted to go and talk to her senior radiographer, and they came back in, and the first words that the senior radiographer sort of said to me was, "So the problem we've seen." And I remember sort of just feeling utterly crushed, like everyone wants their child to be sort of perfect. And that sense of, oh my God, what's wrong? What are we dealing with here? And they talked us through the fact that they had identified that James was missing a hand. They weren't sure on the length of his arm, how much movement he would have through his shoulder, and whether it was indicative of just a physical limb difference or whether there was more that this was a kind of indicator of. And so it really started kind of a whistle-stop tour of kind of DNA scans, amniocentesis, lots of conversations around, what it could be, what it might represent, and quite a daunting process, if I'm honest. My husband and I really felt like as we went through that process, there were some really difficult scenarios for us to appreciate. But regardless, we felt like we had answered as many of the questions as we could medically, and continued through the pregnancy. We were really fortunate to meet an amazing consultant who had done a lot with sort of children with prosthetic needs. And we met her when I was still pregnant, an amazing lady. And I remember her saying to me, you've got so many concerns, worries, fears going through your head right now. The thing that you will never cease to be amazed on is actually how capable your child is going to be at adapting, dealing with, facing into the challenges. And her words of advice, which really stuck true with me, were, if you can show to your child that you are comfortable talking about his limb difference, inviting people to understand it more, being confident kind of around it, that will really convey that sense of confidence to him as well. And that was really something we, I guess, took on as something that we felt was the most, or the best way, I guess, we could take that challenge on. I remember when he was born, it was sort of, that sense of excitement of meeting your next child, and also a bit of sort of inquisitiveness, right? We really didn't know how long his arm would be. We didn't know, as I said, how much movement he would have through his shoulder. And so actually you then kind of kick into that just learning experience of being another new parent again and getting to know your baby. But a real roller coaster, which I think is probably the word that everybody uses, right, as you go through that process.
Now, I know that there will be families watching this who will be very new to Reach, and this might be their first exposure of Reach. They've been through that initial emotional roller coaster, which you describe and you've been through. What advice would you give to somebody who's just found out and they've just been put in touch with Reach? They're watching us here today, and their minds are quite understandably, all over the place. What advice would you give them at that early stage when they first find out?
Yeah, I think the support structure that you can have access to is one of the most valuable things that you will have as you go on this journey. And I think it is really around just understanding that you're not alone. You're not the first parent to deal with this. Your child is not the first child to deal with this. And one of the benefits, the enormous benefits of the Reach community, is that there are always instances where someone has had that experience before you and can give a perspective. And you may take that advice on, you may choose not to, but I think just knowing that your situation is not so unique, and that many people have actually kind of trodden that path before you and can give you perspective advice, even just, the view that you are experiencing this not, as something totally unique, is incredibly valuable.
And roll forward a little bit for us to where we are today. Tell us about James today.
James today, so he is 6, nearly 7, a little force of nature, probably the best way of describing him, trying to tackle homeschooling like so many of us. And as that advice was given to me at the very beginning, doing everything and more that I thought would be possible. He's a really keen horse rider, and we use an adaptive rein so that he can ride independently. Keen bike rider and scooter, as I know many of the Reach children are. And frankly, just a really regular little boy. He's into playing football, colouring, Lego, all of that good stuff. But
and I believe playing
adaptable.
the guitar. And also playing the guitar, I believe.
Yes. So so yeah, James decided after watching School of Rock, which is a movie he absolutely loves, that he wanted to learn to play guitar. So we of course encouraged him to do that. We talked with his guitar instructor, who had never had the opportunity to teach someone before who had a limb difference, and we reached out through the Reach community, kind of looked out for guidance around other people who were sort of playing guitar with maybe only one hand, what advice they had. And so we did, I think what many people did, we did the plectrum stuck on with a bit of Gorilla Tape as our first kind of rudimentary go at playing guitar. And then James has had the opportunity to partner with the Mitt company, or now Koala. And they then shared with us a guitar tool for their prosthetic, which is what he now uses. Not quite ready to be on School of Rock, but enjoys it nonetheless.
And you talked there about Mitt and Koala. The people are often sort of almost, it becomes so much, the variety of adaptations that you can get and things. Where did you learn your research, and where did you get that information from, and which have worked for James?
Yeah, I think in our experience and with James, and again, I think all the kids are different in terms of what they might end up finding useful. But one of the early prosthetics team that we reached out to had said, in their experience, they really find that children in particular will utilize prosthetics when there's real value, rather than probably more of the cosmetic need. And that's certainly been our experience with James. So we had been working with a great NHS team at Stanmore on some very practical prosthetics. So again, ones that would help him on a bicycle when he's trying to manage steering, or similarly on his scooter. We heard about Mitt through the Reach community, and put in our request to be part of their pilot. And I think again that's a great credit to the Reach team, that they're putting those opportunities in front of the Reach community as an opportunity really to get involved in some of that more sort of startup prosthetic solutions that are really innovative, doing some amazing things.
every family goes through the same concerns when it comes to the way people talk to your child and talk to you about their difference. And I know that you're
Mhm.
a keen campaigner when it comes to language and when it comes to the way that people approach, whether it be you or to James. What kind of advice would you give people in that respect?
So, one thing we've always encouraged is for people to ask questions. And that can be, helping a teacher facilitate that kind of conversation in a new classroom, or it can be, frankly, standing in a queue at the supermarket, and you catch someone's eye, maybe looking at James's arm, and it's just about kind of opening that conversation up. And I think doing it with the right intent and acknowledging that you're not always going to get it right. And that's, I think, the approach I've taken, very much kind of driving diversity and inclusion across Graze and within any of the organizations I've operated in, which is, try and become a bit more informed, but more importantly than anything, be curious. And certainly, our experience of that with James is, he'll happily have people asking questions about kind of what happened and why is your arm different, and does it mean you maybe can't do something, and he's really responsive to those kinds of questions. He's equally really quick, if he's bored of hearing them, to tell someone that has been bitten off by a shark and he wants nothing more to talk about. And I think, again, that's a credit to him in terms of the confidence that he's got, and I think so many of the Reach kids have, which is, being open to, maybe answer a question or two about it. I think people are always concerned, does it hurt? Does it feel different? Particularly children. Answer those questions, and then especially I think children, they take it then as that's just normal, and then move on.
And for somebody, you talked there about in your corporate world as the CEO of Graze, and that's a really interesting position to be in, because they always say that any form of change in terms of a corporate ecosystem has to start from the very, very top. For you, this is obviously deeply personal, but how effective has it been to spread that message throughout your organization and the organizations you've been with before?
Yeah, I do believe it's personal. So, and I acknowledge that whenever I talk about it within the business, or externally. In my opinion, I think, diversity and operating with a more inclusive kind of approach to business is not just the right thing to do, because that's how we should all be operating, but it's also the most commercially sound way of operating. We, as a company, we exist to service kind of our consumers, and those consumers are diverse, right? They're a breadth of ethnicities, they're a breadth of sexuality, they're a breadth of physical kind of and mental disabilities. And the more we can open that conversation and have that conversation within an organization, the better we will be at being able to service those business needs. I think within any organization, so often, particularly on diversity and inclusion, the biggest discomfort is, again, not knowing whether you're saying the right thing, or you're maybe putting your foot in it, or you have a concern around doing the wrong thing and being seen to do the wrong thing. I would really encourage any organization that, taking a step on that journey is always better than not taking a step at all. It's better to screw up. Do it with a mindset which is you're open to learn and to listen, and you will make strides. I think particularly with organizations, Graze is an amazing business. We have quite a young employee base, and they are passionate about being at a company that is inclusive and welcoming to kind of all different abilities and capabilities.
And you talked there about the organization as a whole, but what about fellow CEOs, if you get to meet other CEOs, and at the end of the day, as we said before, they are very much at the forefront of making any change that takes place within an organization. What do you say to them personally as a CEO in terms of the way that they become more inclusive?
It's a great question. I would always start with understanding what your company looks like today. I think that's so important. Having a data-driven perspective on kind of what your business is today, and then having a point of view on where you want it to get to in the future. You have to start with that kind of landscape of your business. What is your gender pay gap? What is your level of inclusion of different ethnicities, levels of education, age, within your organization? And then you can understand what of those dimensions is really important to you as a business, what will make that business really thrive. And then with that data understanding of where you've started from, you can start to put into place plans to change it. But I think you have to start with understanding what your business looks like today.
And we've seen tremendous improvements in the workplace culture over the last few years. And it's been really encouraging that diversity and inclusivity is very much a part of the corporate agenda today. But what do you think is the biggest pressing issue for organizations when it comes to those things? What are the things that they need to be doing straight away that maybe some aren't?
So the first place I certainly started when I joined Graze was to have an open conversation about it. We have a regular company meeting, and one of the very earliest ones that I joined, I talked about the fact that diversity and inclusion was personal for me, and it's personal on a number of levels, right? It's personal from a disability inclusion because I'm the mum of James. It's also personal on a gender basis. I am a female CEO of a tech-led food startup, business, maturing business. I'm breaking barriers in that regard as well. So it is a personal agenda. And I talked at that very first session around why it mattered to me, but also why it mattered to me from a business perspective. And again, that's really around, we will be a better business. We will meet the needs of people better if we have a more inclusive workforce, if we have a more inclusive agenda around our marketing, if we're more inclusive as we think about the problems and products that we solve and design for. So it really starts with that, the mandate is because it will create a better business. I think the first place you start is always have that open conversation. And then I think, frankly, it's amazing actually to see the energy that comes from within the organization as soon as you open that door. So one of the really delightful things that I've seen in Graze is we had within a week, we had a squad set up who went, we're going to go and understand this better. We're going to start to, engage with the wider employee base around which areas of diversity and inclusion really matter to them. What are the potential blockers or policies that we might have in place that are stopping us being more inclusive. The energy that comes from just simply opening that conversation is really impressive to see, and that I think has to be your start point.
We often look at Reach children, we look at their future lives, and we've seen, many Paralympians come through the Reach family. We've seen musicians, we've seen actors, we've seen more actors with limb differences on our TV screens now than ever before. And, we hear in many realms of the working life. But what about business? When you look at somebody who maybe has a limb difference coming to work with you, you clearly are going to be very open-minded and do whatever you can to make sure that you are included. But what about a Reach parent who might find that the organisation where their child is now working isn't up to speed? What kind of conversation do you think that they could have with that organisation to help them to understand and help them be more receptive to advice?
I think some of it is actually understanding how easy it is to make adjustments. I think, the reality of all of us working in an incredibly agile and virtual way today means that there are many tools that are already available that we can utilize for our advantage, whether that's on platforms like Microsoft, where actually, live subtitling, or utilizing, different kind of dictation kind of solutions are already so embedded into those platforms. Actually, it's a much easier ask to make workplace adjustments than perhaps people perceive it to be. And then I think the kind of second piece is, again, it comes down to that starting to have that conversation. And don't underestimate that there is that sense of fear of getting it wrong, which, as soon as you start that conversation, actually you typically kind of start to overcome and have that clarity. The second thing I would say is, I think there is immense power in kind of that employee network of again, it's the equivalent of the reach community, but within any organization, that shared experience of, someone else who may have a slightly different disability, but actually their solutions to it may be something that's, of value to someone who's a reach member.
And you've been quite a campaigner, even though you're a CEO of Graze, you've been writing on LinkedIn, some blogs where you're putting, limb difference very much in the focus of people's minds, to the point that actually you were on Steph's packed lunch fairly recently on Channel 4. Tell us a little bit more about, your thoughts about campaigning and what really matters to you at the moment when it comes to limb difference.
Sure. For any of those, my priority is visibility. And I think it's easy to underestimate that until you see it for real life. So an example of that is, James seeing a child on a CBeebies program, or watching one of the, live events from the Reach weekend, where he's going, oh, that kid's just like me, or that person's, got a different arm and just like I do. And again, it just reinforces to him that it's normal, that he's not unique. It's more common than maybe he thinks, because he doesn't necessarily have friends at school who might have a limb difference. And I think the same holds true when we think about it in business, which is it's simply about creating that visibility that then makes it less unusual and more normal. And that enables people to participate more.
This is a big ask, I know, but looking back with James now at 6 years old, is there anything that you wish you had known at the time that you only found out later, or maybe something that you would do a little bit differently, with hindsight, of course, being a wonderful thing?
I think I had underestimated how quickly it would become normal for James's cohort of friends, for James to be the way he is. And I am sure I was probably more concerned about that than on reflection, than I needed to be. And I think some of that was around, being intentional about making sure that, for example, I'd had a conversation with the teacher before the start of the school year, so that particularly as he went into a new school, kind of they were aware of his limb difference. I'm a big fan of, I got the book Different is Awesome, which is a book we love, and I got a copy for school, and I gave that to them, and just really encouraged at the right moment for them to have that conversation in class. And I think as parents, you're so, fiercely protective of making sure that you've done everything that you possibly can do, when actually in reality, especially I think kids at this age, kind of get on. And so my reflection would be maybe stress a little bit less about it. I think you have to make sure in your own conscious you've kind of done everything that you could do, but kids are both amazingly resilient and incredibly accepting, far more than adults are. And so I think you have to also give a little on that as well.
I'm sure that'll be very welcome advice for a lot of people, just to stress less about it and let them crack on with it. And, for me, when I'm at the Reach weekends and I see them, playing and doing all the things, which is just completely normal, and
Mhm.
where they can actually feel completely comfortable amongst others who are the same as them is just an absolute delight to see. Looking forward to the future, how do you see the next few years for James in terms of his school, in terms of his hobbies, the various activities he wants to do, and for that matter, some of the latest technology with his wearables and things like that?
Yeah, so clearly I have passion and desire for him to become a Paralympic dressage rider. But if I put that maybe to the side, I think it's about making sure that he's got the resources he needs, as he goes through different hobbies, different experiences. One of, again, the things that I think the Reach community is brilliant at is, a quick post that says, James is trying to learn to tie shoes. Give me your tips. And the speed with which people are willing to give their experiences, the quick videos are like, this is how I do it. Making sure that we just continue to take advantage of that, because I'm under no illusion there will be challenges that he faces, over the coming years. But knowing that you've got that community there to support you, who have probably all been through it all before, we'll just continue to take advantage of it and hopefully also contribute to it as well.
And finally, you've talked about Reach throughout this interview, and it's been great that you're clearly such a fan and it's been so helpful to you. For anybody who's just joining Reach, and we talked about this at the very beginning of our conversation, what advice would you give to them to get the most out of Reach, to get the best benefits so that their child can enjoy the kind of assistance and help and advice that James has had?
I really believe actually it's about utilising it in the way that you want to and that works for you. So I think, for some people that's about going to a Reach weekend. I think for others it's about participating in the group on Facebook. For others it may just be a one-to-one conversation with either your kind of regional or some of the central office team. And I think that's the beauty actually of Reach, is it gives you the opportunities to participate on any level. I certainly remember, when I first joined the Reach community, being a bit daunted by the prospect of going to a Reach weekend. That felt like, I'm not sure I'm quite ready for that. But I think, the benefit of the community is actually you can access it in multiple different ways and with whatever level of participation actually you want to.
That's brilliant, and thanks very much to you, Joanna, and to everybody watching today. And don't forget to continue the chat at the bottom of this video, where you'll be able to get more of your questions answered and hear from fellow Reach families. In the meantime, we'll see you again next Saturday morning at 10 a.m. In the meantime, thanks again for watching. Bye-bye for now.